I woke up before dawn to a sound so violent it snapped me fully awake in a single second. Not an alarm, not wind, metal screaming, steel grinding, hydraulic lines popping like gunshots in the cold. The kind of noise that tells you something important is being destroyed, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. When I looked out the front window, my chest dropped. My snowplow, my work truck, my income, the thing that feeds my kids, was being torn apart right there in my own driveway. Bent metal, cracked fittings, fresh damage everywhere. And standing a few feet away, watching like this was some kind of achievement, was Marjorie Whitlock, the HOA board leader. Arms crossed, calm, smiling just enough to let me know this was intentional. All of it was supposedly over a parking violation. She decided my plow counted as commercial equipment and didn't match the neighborhood's image. Never mind that it had been parked there for years. Never mind that every winter that same truck is the only reason ambulances, fire trucks, and families can get out of this place at all. What she never asked, what she never cared to learn, was that I wasn't just some guy with a noisy truck. I was the reason this neighborhood functions when the snow hits. By destroying my plow, the HOA didn't just cross a line. They shut off their own winter lifeline. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I've lived in Hollow Ridge Estates for nearly 15 years, long enough to remember when the place was known more for reliability than looks. It sits just outside Pine Hollow, Wyoming, far enough from town that winter hits harder and stays longer. When I first bought my house, nobody cared about matching shutters or perfect lawns. People cared about whether you could get out of your driveway when the snow came down sideways at 3 in the morning. Families lived here. Retired couples, tradespeople who worked with their hands, folks who understood that winter out here isn't a mood or a postcard, it's survival. My name is Ethan Calder, and snow removal isn't a side hustle for me. It's the family trade. My grandfather started the business with a single truck and a borrowed plow back when Pine Hollow barely showed up on maps. My father expanded it, built relationships, and taught me that if you promise someone their road will be clear, you make sure it is clear, no matter what the forecast says. By the time I took over, our name meant something. We didn't just clear driveways. We kept emergency routes open. We made sure ambulances could reach homes. Fire trucks could pass. Elderly residents didn't get stranded behind walls of ice they physically couldn't move. Hollow Ridge Estates benefited from that for years. The HOA knew it. The neighbors knew it. When storms hit, nobody panicked, because they knew my truck would be out there before sunrise. My plow parked in my driveway wasn't an eyesore to them. It was reassurance. For a long time, the HOA didn't have a single issue with it. In fact, they leaned on me. They'd call asking when I planned to clear the main loop. They'd ask if I could check on certain houses first. They'd thank me at meetings and move on. That changed the moment Marjorie Whitlock took control. She moved into the neighborhood a few years ago from out of state, and from the beginning, she treated Hollow Ridge like a project instead of a place people lived. Everything she said sounded polished. Everything she proposed came wrapped in phrases like community standards, brand value, and long-term aesthetics. Within months of becoming the HOA board leader, she started rewriting the culture of the neighborhood without ever asking why things worked the way they did. Suddenly, stuff that had never been a problem became an issue. A utility trailer parked behind a fence, work boots sitting by a front door, a ladder leaning against a garage. She called them violations. She sent notices. She started fines. The neighborhood got quieter, not because things improved, but because people were nervous. Then she found my truck. At first it was subtle. A warning slipped into my mailbox about commercial vehicles. No fine, just a reminder. I brushed it off, assuming it was a blanket notice that would get clarified. A week later, there was a fine. Not huge, but pointed. Another week passed, and there was a printed notice taped directly to my door stating that commercial equipment was no longer permitted to be parked overnight anywhere visible within the neighborhood. Even private driveways. That's when I went to talk to her. I didn't argue. I didn't threaten, I explained. I told her that truck had been parked there for over a decade. I told her it was essential equipment. I told her I had written service agreements with multiple residents, some of whom relied on me because they physically couldn't clear snow themselves. I even offered compromises, parking angles, covers, screening, anything reasonable. She listened the way people listen when they've already decided. She smiled. She nodded. She thanked me for being passionate. Then she said the words that told me exactly where this was going. Rules are rules, she said. And consistency is important. What she meant was obedience. From that moment on, it stopped feeling like enforcement and started feeling personal. My truck became her fixation. Every snowstorm triggered a new complaint. Every early morning start became noise. Every maintenance check was suddenly industrial activity. She never once acknowledged that the same equipment she was targeting was the reason Hollow Ridge didn't ground to a halt every winter. That's when it finally hit me. This wasn't about parking. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't about appearance. It was about control. Things didn't cool down after that conversation. They exploded. The fines didn't just continue, they multiplied. 1 became 2. 2 became 3. What started as a few $100s quickly turned into thousands, stacked on top of each other, each one justified with vague language and conveniently broad interpretations of the rules. Every snowfall triggered a fresh wave of complaints. Noise violations for starting my truck before sunrise. Emissions complaints even though the vehicle passed inspections for years. Notices about unsightly equipment, dated for hours when I wasn't even home, let alone operating anything. It felt like someone was watching my driveway with a stopwatch. The pressure started bleeding into the neighborhood. People stopped waving as openly. Conversations lowered when I walked by. Some neighbors pulled me aside quietly to say they thought the HOA had gone too far, but their voices dropped when they said it, like walls might be listening. Others were angry on my behalf, but afraid to put their names on anything. Nobody wanted to be next. That fear was exactly what Marjorie thrived on. Then came the inspection. I was doing routine maintenance one morning when a county truck pulled up without warning. A man stepped out wearing a reflective vest and carrying a clipboard like it was a weapon. He introduced himself as Darren Lowell, a county compliance officer, and said he was responding to multiple anonymous complaints. He didn't ask questions. He didn't listen to explanations. He went straight to work. He crawled under the truck, measured distances, took photos, checked serial numbers. He flagged things that had never been flagged before: equipment placement, idle time, storage classification. Stuff that had passed inspections year after year was suddenly a serious concern. By the time he finished, he'd written enough citations to threaten my entire winter operation. What made it worse was how rehearsed it felt. He knew exactly where to look, exactly what to cite, exactly how to phrase it so that appealing would be difficult and time-consuming. This wasn't a random inspection sparked by concerned neighbors. This was targeted. I filed an appeal the same day. The HOA denied any involvement. Marjorie sent an email saying they had no authority over county enforcement and were simply following procedure. But when Darren returned to post the citation notice, she stood beside him, nodding along as if they were reading from the same script. Watching them together made something in my gut turn cold. The neighborhood tension thickened after that. People started avoiding HOA meetings entirely. Some residents who depended on me for snow removal quietly asked what they were supposed to do if my truck got shut down. Others whispered that Marjorie had been asking questions about who used my services, like she was building a list. That was when Clara Jensen knocked on my door. Clara had lived in Hollow Ridge longer than almost anyone. She was sharp, observant, and deeply underestimated because of her age. She leaned on a cane, but her eyes missed nothing. She didn't waste time with small talk. She told me she'd overheard Marjorie's son, Logan Whitlock, bragging at a bar in town, loudly, carelessly. He'd been telling his friends that his mother was cleaning up the neighborhood and that the snow guy would be gone soon. According to him, it was only a matter of time before I got the message. Clara's voice dropped when she told me that. She said people were scared, not just annoyed or frustrated, scared. Scared of fines they couldn't afford, scared of retaliation, scared of becoming the next example. She said she'd seen this pattern before in other communities. One target at a time, isolate them, pressure them, make everyone else watch. Then she said the sentence that rewired how I saw everything. "You're not the first," she told me. "Just the most useful." She explained that before me, Marjorie had gone after a contractor who stored tools in his garage, then a family with an older RV, then a retired couple who refused to replace a perfectly functional fence. Each time, the HOA framed it as enforcement. Each time, the person eventually gave in or left. The neighborhood adjusted. The board grew bolder. I was different because I was visible, because my work mattered to everyone, because removing me would send a message louder than any fine ever could. Standing there listening to Clara, I finally understood the real danger. This wasn't just harassment. It wasn't even about my truck anymore. It was about power and precedent. If they could force me out, someone the entire neighborhood relied on, they could force anyone out. And judging by the inspections, the fines, and the quiet coordination unfolding around me, they were done pretending otherwise. Instead of reacting the way they probably expected. Angry emails, public arguments, emotional blow-ups. I did the opposite. I went quiet. I started paying attention. Every time something felt off, I treated it like evidence instead of an insult. The first thing I did was install cameras. Not just one or two, but enough to cover every angle of my driveway, the street, and the side yard where my equipment sat. I upgraded my phone, set it to automatically record calls, and stopped having conversations unless I could document them. Emails went into folders. Notices got scanned. Envelopes got photographed before I even opened them. I didn't respond immediately anymore. I read everything twice, sometimes 3 times. If they wanted a paper trail, I was going to give them one they couldn't outrun. That's when I called Walter Grayson. Walter used to live 3 houses down before downsizing and moving closer to town. Retired contract attorney. Quiet guy. The kind of neighbor who waves but doesn't gossip. I explained what was happening and asked if he could look over some of my documents just to tell me whether I was crazy or not. He came over the next afternoon with reading glasses and a yellow legal pad. At first, he didn't say much. He flipped through HOA notices, inspection reports, and my service agreements, occasionally humming under his breath. Then I handed him a faded folder my father had kept for decades, old contracts, handwritten notes, and copies of agreements my grandfather had signed back when Hollow Ridge was still being developed. Walter stopped flipping pages. He went still in a way that made my stomach tighten. "This," he said slowly, tapping the paper, "is not informal." Turns out my grandfather hadn't just shaken hands with the original developer. He'd signed an official winter access agreement guaranteeing snow removal for the development in exchange for access rights and long-term service terms. It had been recorded, filed, incorporated into the original development documents, and nobody had ever properly terminated it. That meant the HOA didn't just rely on my services out of convenience. They relied on them legally, cutting off my equipment, restricting my ability to operate, or forcing me out without replacing that agreement didn't just inconvenience residents. It violated the foundation Hollow Ridge was built on. Walter leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. "They can't do what they're doing," he said. "Not without cutting their own throat." That alone would have been enough to change the tone of everything. But Walter wasn't finished. He hadn't liked the inspection reports. Something about Darren Lowell's wording bothered him. Too aggressive, too specific, too consistent across unrelated complaints. So he did what lawyers do when something smells wrong. He looked deeper. It didn't take long. Darren Lowell wasn't just a county compliance officer. He also ran a small consulting business on the side. The pitch was simple: help property owners resolve compliance issues quickly and avoid prolonged enforcement. The clients, a suspicious number of people who had been cited by him personally. It was a pressure system disguised as enforcement. Create the problem. Sell the solution. Walter showed me the filings, the business registrations, the overlap in timelines. Suddenly, the inspection didn't look like a response to complaints. It looked like a lever pulled at exactly the right moment. And the more we looked, the more fingerprints appeared. Emails from the HOA referencing, county verification, before the inspection ever happened. Messages that implied outcomes before procedures were completed. Conversations where Marjorie used the same phrases Darren used in his reports, almost word for word. This wasn't coincidence. It was coordination. That's when my mindset shifted completely. Up until then, I'd been trying to protect myself, my truck, my business, my reputation. But now I saw something bigger forming, a pattern, a system designed to pressure people quietly until they broke or left. And systems leave trails. Every time Marjorie spoke, I let her. Every time the HOA sent a notice, I thanked them for clarifying. I stopped correcting them. Stopped pushing back publicly. I let them believe I was cornered. Behind the scenes, Walter helped me organize everything. Timelines, cross-references, contradictions. We backed everything up in multiple places. We looped in a few trusted neighbors who were willing to provide statements when the time came. Winter was coming fast, and Hollow Ridge depended on me more than ever. They thought that dependence made me weak. What they didn't realize was that pressure doesn't just crush people. Sometimes it reveals exactly who's applying it and why. That's when things crossed from paperwork into intimidation. I came out one morning to find my truck sitting lower than it should have been. At first, I thought the cold had messed with the pressure. Then I crouched down and saw it. 4 clean slashes, 1 on each tire. Not ragged, not random. Whoever did it knew exactly where to cut so the damage couldn't be patched. It wasn't a prank. It was a message. I reported it, of course. Took photos, filed the report. The response was polite and empty. No witnesses. No cameras nearby. Unlikely to go anywhere. I replaced the tires and kept moving. Because that's what I'd always done. You don't stop working just because someone wants you to. A week later, they went bigger. It was late. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the air had that sharp edge that tells you it's coming. I was inside finishing paperwork when my phone buzzed with a camera alert. Motion detected near the equipment shed. I opened the feed and felt my chest tighten. There were 3 figures in the frame. One of them I recognized immediately. Logan Whitlock, Marjorie's son. He was unsteady on his feet, laughing too loud, the kind of drunk confidence that only comes from believing consequences don't apply to you. 2 other guys were with him, faces half lit by their phones. They didn't hesitate. They went straight for my backup plow. Tools came out. Bolts hit the ground. Hydraulic lines were yanked and sliced. One of them kicked the housing just to hear it break. The whole time, Logan kept talking. Bragging. Saying this was what happened when people didn't get the message. Saying his mother was tired of dealing with me and wanted the problem handled. Then one of the friends did the dumbest thing possible. He filmed it. Not secretly. Not carefully, he narrated it, panned the camera across the damage, zoomed in on Logan's face while he laughed, and said they were doing the neighborhood a favor. The video ended with Logan slapping the side of the plow and saying I wouldn't be pushing snow anymore. They left like they just finished a joke. The video went up online less than an hour later. Public, tagged. 15 minutes of digital immortality before someone realized what they'd done and took it down. It didn't matter. 15 minutes was enough. I had the footage from my cameras. Clear faces. Clear actions. Clear audio. I had the online clip saved by 3 different people before it disappeared. Voices. Intent. Motive spoken out loud. It wasn't vandalism anymore. It was a crime with a confession. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't post anything. I didn't say a word to Marjorie. I called Walter. He came over the next morning, watched the footage once, then again, slower. He didn't swear. He didn't shake his head. He just nodded like a man who had been waiting for confirmation. This, he said, is where it gets very serious for them. While insurance adjusters inspected the damage, Walter kept digging. He had been reviewing HOA financials, cross-checking budgets against actual services, looking for inconsistencies. What he found made my stomach turn. Money had been allocated every winter for snow services. Not small amounts. Significant chunks of the reserve fund. But it wasn't going to me. It wasn't going to any known contractor. It was being paid to a company called Summit Winter Solutions. I'd never heard of them. Walter pulled the records. Summit Winter Solutions didn't have trucks, didn't have employees, didn't have a yard. On paper, it existed just enough to collect checks. The registered contact traced back to a relative of Marjorie's, her sister. It was a shell. The realization hit all at once. The fines, the inspections, the pressure, the attempt to label my equipment illegal, the push to remove me before winter. It wasn't just about control or aesthetics. It was about money. They needed me gone, so no one would question why the snow budget was being drained by a company that didn't actually plow anything. Marjorie wasn't trying to replace me with another contractor. She was trying to replace me with nothing. The irony was almost unbearable. She called my truck commercial equipment. While quietly siphoning funds meant for actual winter access, she framed me as a liability while risking the safety of every resident the moment snow hit. And now her son had committed a crime on camera trying to speed the process along. That was the moment something in me hardened. Up until then, I'd been reacting, protecting, preserving, gathering evidence in case I needed it. After that night, after seeing the footage and the financial trail laid out side by side, I stopped thinking like a target. I started thinking like someone holding the map to a collapse. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to threaten. I didn't even need to move fast. I just needed to stop playing defense and let them keep proving who they really were. The storm hit in early January. The kind you hear about on the radio and hope misses you. It didn't. Snow started falling before midnight and didn't stop. Thick flakes at first, then sleet, then heavy wet snow that packed down into ice the moment tires touched it. By dawn, Hollow Ridge looked calm from a distance and deadly up close. Without my plow running, the main loop turned into a skating rink. Cars slid sideways just trying to leave driveways. One SUV clipped a mailbox and spun into a snowbank. Another couldn't make it up the slight incline near the entrance and blocked the road for everyone behind it. People who normally would have been cleared out before sunrise were stuck inside, watching the snow pile up and realizing, all at once, how fragile things were without that truck. Then Clara called. Her voice was tight, controlled, the way people sound when they're trying not to panic. She told me an ambulance was on the way. Chest pain, trouble breathing. But the dispatcher warned them the road conditions were bad and access might be delayed. I stepped outside and looked at the street. Untouched. Frozen. Impassable. That was the moment the neighborhood truly felt the cost of what the HOA had done. Phones lit up across Hollow Ridge. Group chats exploded. People posted photos of their driveways buried under ice, videos of cars sliding, screenshots of emergency alerts. Panic moved faster than the storm. And with it came a sudden, very loud question. Where was Ethan? That's when the emails started. The tone changed completely. Gone were the stiff warnings and formal language. In their place were carefully worded messages asking if I could assist temporarily. Just this once. Just to help the residents. Just until things got sorted out. Marjorie herself emailed me, using phrases like community need and extraordinary circumstances. She talked about cooperation and flexibility, about putting differences aside for the good of everyone. I didn't reply. A few hours later, someone knocked on my door. It was Logan. He stood on my porch shifting his weight, trying to look sober, trying to look reasonable. In his hand was a thick envelope. He didn't even pretend it was something else. Good faith, he said, holding it out. For helping today. I didn't touch it. I asked him to say that again. He did, slower this time, on camera. I told him I couldn't accept cash and that all communication should go through official channels. He muttered something about how his mom was stressed and how this could all go away if I wasn't so difficult. Then he left the envelope on the railing and walked off. I documented it. Every second. Later that afternoon, another familiar truck pulled up, Darren Lowell. Same clipboard, same vest, same routine. He claimed he needed to verify conditions and recess compliance, given the emergency. The timing would have been laughable if it wasn't so transparent. I recorded the entire interaction. From the moment he stepped onto my property to the moment he left. His questions. His phrasing. The way he referenced HOA concerns like they were part of his jurisdiction. The way he tried to steer the conversation toward my willingness to cooperate in exchange for flexibility. He didn't realize he was narrating his own involvement. By nightfall, the storm had gotten worse. Snow stacked on ice stacked on snow. The main road into Hollow Ridge was barely passable. Residents were posting videos of spinning tires and stalled cars. Someone shared a screenshot showing emergency services delayed due to access issues. That was when Marjorie sent another email. This one wasn't polite. It wasn't cooperative. It was desperate. She said the HOA expected me to assist immediately, and that failure to do so would be noted. She tried to frame my refusal as negligence, as abandonment, as proof that I had always been the problem. I saved it. Then I forwarded it to Walter. At that point, the evidence pile had grown heavy enough to buckle under its own weight. We had the vandalism on camera, the attempted cash payoff, the inspection coordination, the shell company draining snow funds, and now, written proof that the HOA was pressuring me to operate under threat while simultaneously claiming my equipment was illegal. Every move they made during the storm exposed the lie they'd built around me. They said I was unnecessary, yet they begged when the roads froze. They said my truck was a violation, yet demanded I use it when things went bad. They said I was the problem, yet couldn't function without me. I stayed inside that night, listening to the wind and the ice hitting the windows, watching the camera feeds, backing everything up in 3 different places. The storm kept falling, quiet and relentless, burying every excuse they had left. By morning, Hollow Ridge wasn't just snowed in, it was exposed. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for that evening, and by the time I arrived, the community center parking lot was already full. Cars lined the street. People stood in small groups near the entrance, bundled in coats, talking in low, urgent voices. This wasn't a routine meeting. Everyone knew something was coming. They just didn't know what. Inside, the room was packed wall to wall. Folding chairs filled every inch of space, and people stood along the back and sides. Neighbors who hadn't attended a meeting in years were there. Elderly residents, families, people who had spent the last 2 days trapped in their homes, sliding on ice, watching emergency alerts stack up on their phones. Marjorie Whitlock stood at the front like she owned the room. She had a projector set up, slides ready, posture perfect. She waited until the noise settled, then launched straight into her presentation. Charts, bullet points, phrases like public safety, liability exposure, and non-compliant equipment. She spoke calmly, confidently, painting me as a reckless operator who put the neighborhood at risk. She said my truck was illegal, unsafe, and improperly stored. She implied that the storm chaos was proof that relying on a single contractor had always been a mistake. Every word was delivered like a verdict. She never mentioned the vandalism, never mentioned the fines, never mentioned the shell company. She talked about responsibility while carefully avoiding her own. People murmured. Some nodded, uncertain. Others crossed their arms. Fear has a way of making lies sound reasonable, especially when they're wrapped in authority. When she finished, she thanked everyone for coming and said the board would be voting on immediate corrective action. That's when Walter stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply said, "We'd like to respond." Marjorie hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough. Then she nodded, the way someone does when they believe they're still in control. Walter walked to the front and connected his laptop to the projector. The first thing that played wasn't a chart. It was a video. Logan Whitlock's face filled the screen, lit by porch lights and phone glare. Laughing, slurring his words, bragging. The sound of metal breaking echoed through the room as he talked about handling the problem. The camera angle shifted, showing the damage, the tools, the deliberate destruction. Then his voice again, clear and unmistakable, saying they were doing this because I wouldn't cooperate. The room went dead silent. Someone gasped. Someone else swore under their breath. Marjorie took a step back from the podium, like she'd been physically struck. Walter paused the video on Logan's face and let it sit there. Then he clicked to the next slide, bank records, date transfers, highlighted entries showing HOA funds earmarked for snow services being paid out to Summit Winter Solutions. Month after month, year after year, Walter explained calmly that the company had no equipment, no employees, and no record of performing any work. He showed the registration linking it back to Marjorie's sister. The murmurs turned into angry whispers. Then came the contract. Walter held up a scanned copy of the original winter access agreement signed by my grandfather and the developer. He explained that it had been recorded, never terminated, and was still binding. He explained what that meant in plain terms. That restricting my equipment didn't just inconvenience residents. It violated the legal framework the neighborhood depended on for winter access. Marjorie tried to interrupt. Walter didn't stop. That's when I stood up. I didn't rush the front. I didn't shout. I simply said there was one more thing everyone needed to see. I nodded toward the back doors. Outside, an engine turned over. At first, it was distant, a low rumble. Then it grew louder, unmistakable, the deep, steady sound of a diesel engine under load. Conversations stopped. People stood. The doors opened, and through the windows they saw it. My plow, clean, repaired, fully operational. The same machine Marjorie had labeled abandoned, unsafe, and inoperable. The same equipment she'd claimed justified every fine, every inspection, every action she'd taken. The engine idled smoothly. The plow lifted and dropped on command. The room froze. Marjorie's mouth opened, but no sound came out. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. She called it staged, claimed manipulation, tried to say the footage was edited, the records misunderstood. But the truth didn't need defending anymore. People stood up. Questions flew. Why was her son involved? Why was money missing? Why was an ambulance delayed? Why had she demanded I help during the storm if my equipment was illegal? She tried to regain control, tried to call for order, tried to end the meeting. No one listened. Walter calmly announced that evidence had already been submitted to the appropriate authorities. He listed the issues plainly: vandalism, attempted bribery, financial misconduct, and coordination with a county inspector under questionable circumstances. At that point, Marjorie wasn't leading anything. She was shrinking. The authority she'd built on fear collapsed under the weight of its own lies. Not because I shouted, not because I threatened, but because the truth had finally been placed where everyone could see it, hear it, and understand it. By the time the meeting dissolved into chaos, one thing was clear. The story Marjorie had been telling was over, and there was no spinning what came next. The fallout moved faster than I expected and slower than it should have. Within days of that meeting, Marjorie Whitlock resigned for personal reasons, at least according to the carefully worded email the HOA sent out. Nobody believed it. Not after what everyone had seen. Not after what had been said out loud in that room. Her resignation wasn't closure. It was damage control. The real consequences followed quietly but steadily. Investigators started asking questions, not just about the vandalism, but about the money, about the shell company, about why snow service funds had been redirected to a business that didn't own a single plow, about why a county compliance officer's inspection timeline matched HOA emails almost word for word. What had been dismissed as neighborhood drama suddenly became a matter of records, audits, and sworn statements. The HOA board didn't survive it. One by one, members stepped down. Some claimed ignorance. Some admitted they had been afraid to challenge Marjorie. Others simply disappeared from meetings altogether. Within a month, the board was formally dissolved and placed under temporary oversight while a new structure was put together. Transparency requirements were added. Financial reviews became mandatory. Selective enforcement policies were scrapped entirely. My contract was reinstated without conditions. Not just reinstated. Emergency access was written into the bylaws. Clear language. No ambiguity. The neighborhood finally put into writing what it had relied on for years without acknowledging. Damages were paid for the destroyed equipment, the lost time, and the inspections that never should have happened. Insurance handled part of it. The HOA covered the rest. Logan faced consequences, too. He wasn't quietly let off the hook the way he'd probably expected. The footage made that impossible. As part of the resolution, his accountability was tied directly to the thing he'd tried to destroy. Court-ordered community service, performed under supervision, assisting with winter cleanup and snow-related labor. No shortcuts, no hiding. He had to show up in the cold and do the work he'd mocked. People noticed. Winter access was restored fully by the next storm. Roads cleared before sunrise. Driveways opened. Emergency vehicles moved without delay. The neighborhood exhaled, slowly realizing how close it had come to losing something essential over ego and greed. Trust didn't snap back overnight. It rebuilt in pieces. Neighbors started talking again. HOA meetings became quieter, less theatrical, more practical. People asked questions without fear. Concerns were addressed instead of weaponized. Clara smiled more. Residents who had avoided eye contact apologized for staying silent. I didn't hold it against them. Fear makes cowards out of good people, and courage doesn't always arrive on time. What stuck with me most was how quickly things stabilized once the pressure was gone. No chaos, no collapse. Just a return to common sense. Winter still came. Snow still fell, but the roads stayed open, and for the first time in a long while, Hollow Ridge Estates felt like a community again. Not because someone was enforcing perfection, but because the people who kept it running were finally allowed to do their jobs without being treated like a problem. Looking back now, I realize this was never really about a truck sitting in a driveway. It was about respect, about who a community chooses to protect and who it decides is expendable the moment power gets involved. It was about how easy it is for authority to forget the people doing the unglamorous work that keeps everything functioning. Winter doesn't care about appearance. Snow doesn't pause because someone wants cleaner sightlines or prettier streets. Ice doesn't check titles before it blocks an ambulance or traps a family inside their home. When the storms come, the only thing that matters is whether someone is willing and able to do the work. I still plow Hollow Ridge Estates every winter. Not because a contract forces me to, not because the HOA demands it. I do it because I've seen what happens when access disappears and people are left helpless behind frozen roads and locked gates. I've seen how quickly comfort turns into panic when reality shows up uninvited. What this experience taught me is simple. Communities don't survive on rules alone. They survive on trust, accountability, and respect for the people who keep things running when conditions get hard. The moment leadership starts targeting those people instead of supporting them, something is already broken. Sometimes it takes a storm to expose that truth. Sometimes it takes pressure. And sometimes it takes letting those in power walk straight into the consequences of their own decisions. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?